A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Someone asked the following question. I live in Yerushalayim and I work in Tel Aviv. I do not have time to eat breakfast before I leave and would like to eat a sandwich on the bus. However, there is no possibility of washing one's hands on the bus. Is there a solution to this problem?
Well, one could be facetious and suggest that the solution is very simple. Either move to Tel Aviv and have therefore more time in the morning to eat breakfast before going to work, or to find a job in Yerushalayim. And others might suggest, perhaps tongue-in-cheek and perhaps not, that the solution is to switch to a gluten-free diet and avoid bread at all costs. But of course, all this is being said in a humorous, tongue-in-cheek fashion. The truth of the matter is that there is a very simple solution to this situation that is described by the person asking the question, and that is the explicit statement that we find in the Talmud Bavli, in the Masechet Hulin, Daf Kof Waw Amud Bet 106b, where Rav states as follows: Notel Adam Yadaw Shaharith Umatne Alehem Kol Hayom. Notel Adam Yadaw Shaharith, a person may choose, if he wishes, to wash his hands in the usual manner with a vessel, as one does before Tefillah or Kriyat Shema or eating bread, etc., before which one must wash one's hands, as we know. One may do so in the morning, and rely on that netilah, on that washing of the hands, to eat bread at a later time during the day, even many hours later. And Rashi explains there that this is being done for the purpose of eating bread, for example, later. And one has to know that there is a condition, says Rashi. The condition is that you have to be careful. That is to say, you have to be aware of what you're doing with your hands and be careful not to get them dirty and not to allow them to become tameh during the course of those hours until you eat the bread, until you finish eating your meal. And this is really self-evident, because this is required also when one washes one's hands immediately before eating a meal. One is required during the meal to keep one's hands clean, that is to say, not touch certain parts of the body that are considered to be usually dirty or unseemly, and not to allow one's hands to become tameh. If one does so, shall we say, in the middle of a meal, one is required to wash one's hands, just as one is required, for example, in the middle of a meal, a person gets up and goes to the bathroom, they have to wash their hands again, as they did before the meal, again, the second time, in the middle of the meal, because heseh hada'ath is the essential principle when it comes to Natilat Yadayim. And I will explain what I mean by that. Rambam also explains this halakha in this fashion. Rambam says, he brings this halakha in Ilchot Barachot, Perek Shishi, the 6th chapter, and he writes that one may do so, uvilvad shelo hisiach et da'ato mehen, shelo, that he has to keep his mind on his hands. That is to say, he has to be aware and keep in mind that I have washed my hands at an earlier point in the day, in order to rely on that netilah at a later time to eat bread, for example. And one has to have this uppermost in one's mind during that period of time until one eats that bread. It is not normally the case that a person pays particular attention to what he does with his hands during the course of his day, during the course of his activities. And that is exactly why we are required to wash our hands before tefillah, before eating bread, because we don't know exactly what we did with our hands. But if we were to know, for example, with certainty, that from the last time I washed my hands, let's say 6 hours ago, for example, if a person knew with certainty that my hands have remained clean and I have not touched anything that I should not have touched, and my hands have not become tameh in any fashion during that time, in other words, there was no heseh hada'ath, there was no lack of awareness regarding what one's hands are doing, then there is no issue, there's no problem. In other words, the reason that one has to wash one's hands before every meal when one wishes to eat bread, or before starting to pray, for example, is because we normally do not keep ourselves aware of what our hands are doing. We do have heseh hada'ath, but if one knows that one did not have heseh hada'ath, one did not lose any awareness regarding one's hands, what they're up to during a certain period of time, even if it's a very long period of time. As the statement of Rabbi suggests, one can wash one's hands in the morning and rely on them kol hayom, for all day long. If so, then there is no need to wash one's hands. That is also exactly why Rambam writes in Hilchot Hames U'Masar Perek Shmini, in the 8th chapter, when he speaks about the Lela Seder, how one conducts the Seder. The Rambam writes, as we know, that after Kiddush, after the first cup of wine, we wash our hands and we eat a green vegetable, and then we say a certain portion of the Haggadah, a fairly large portion of the Haggadah, the main section, that is really, of the Haggadah, and then at the end of that we have the second cup of wine, and we make the bracha and we drink it, and then we wash our hands again before eating the matzah. And Rambam himself points out there that the reason you wash your hands a second time now before the matzah, even though you washed your hands earlier in the evening, perhaps only half an hour before, perhaps an hour and a half or 2 hours, all depends how long and how intense and how active and lively one seder is, but certainly not too long before that one washed one's hands previously, and therefore why is one required to wash one's hands again? Rambam says it is because we assume that you were Mesiach Hada'ath during the Haggadah, that you were so involved in the discussion and the explanation of the Haggadah and thinking about these things, you weren't really aware of what your hands were up to, and that's called Mesiach Hada'ath. But if, for example, one knows that one did not do so during the course of the reading of the Haggadah, then one is not required to wash one's hands a second time. And the Ramban also says so in the Teshuvah, which is quoted by the Beit Yosef in Bar-Hayim Siman Chof Samach Daled. So to sum up, Rambam tells us that and Riaz, by the way, in the 8th Perek of Masechet Berachot writes the same, that the principle with regards to Natilat Yadayim is Heseh Hada'ath. If you know that from the last time you washed your hands, you are fully aware of what your hands were up to, because you had it in mind that I'm going to, on the basis of this netilah, either daven sometime later or I'm going to eat bread sometime later, then you do not need to wash your hands again, and you are able to do so even lechatchila. And Rashi points out that when we say that you have to be aware and you have to keep this in mind, what that means is, in practical terms, is that you have to make sure they remain clean and that they do not become tameh. And in other words, Rashi and the Rambam are not disagreeing. They're both saying exactly the same thing. When Rambam says you have to not lose sight or not be unaware of what your hands are doing, he means that you should know that you don't do these things that Rashi mentions, and vice versa. When Rashi says these things, he means keep your mind on your hands and do not forget about the fact that you washed your hands and are going to rely on that netilah later. This halacha is brought by many Rishonim, and the vast majority understand it in this fashion, that one may choose to do so whenever one wishes, not only when there is a pressing need to do so, such as a situation where there is no water available or unlikely to be water available later, but even if one doesn't think that's going to be the case, one may do so lechatchila. In the Talmud, in fact, it mentions that a certain Chacham, Rabbi, mentioned to certain Jews in a certain place where water was scarce. Perhaps it seems they were talking about people who worked in the fields all day and there was no water present. He said to them, you should wash your hands in the morning and then you can rely on that during the day and eat, etc., based on that netilah. And the Talmud suggests that perhaps he was disagreeing with Rav, who made the statement in a general blanket fashion for all Jews in all situations, and perhaps he thinks this only should be used, this halachic statement should only be relied upon when water is scarce, or when one thinks one will not have water later, also in some similar situation. And there are others who say in the Talmud that no, he was agreeing with the Rabbi. He just happened to mention to these people because they needed this advice. For them it was helpful and practical advice. But in fact, this halakha applies to all people at all times. You don't have to be in a pressing situation without water, or where you think you'll be without water, in order to make use of this halakha. And the halachic conclusion of the vast majority of the poskim And based on the pshat of the Talmud is that this halakha applies to all at all times. This is what Rambam writes, this is what the Rosh writes, this is the opinion of the Tur, and this is also the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch for that matter in Siman Kof Samach Darer. And in fact it's very surprising that many people, and in my experience also many Rabbanim, are not very familiar with this halakha, if they've heard of it at all, and are very surprised when I've mentioned this to different people on different occasions. What we see from this halakha, amongst other things, is that the Torah is fully aware that people will find themselves in situations where water is scarce, or it'll be difficult to do Natilat Yadayim at a later time, and therefore the solution was given ahead of time that you may do so before. In the case of this person who has to go to work, the person can wash their hands before they leave their home, with the intention of eating the sandwich on the bus in a certain amount of time, whether it's 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour later, and it doesn't matter, it can also be hours later, and that's perfectly all right. There's no reason not to do so. It's perfectly permissible. It is true that some poskim, not many, were of the opinion that should only be relied upon where there is pressing need, but this is not the simple reading of the Sugya and Masechet Chulin. This is not the conclusion of the vast majority of the great poskim that we just mentioned. And third of all, I would point out that this situation where a person is in a rush and must get to work and has no time and wants to eat on the bus, this exactly is a Sha'at HaDachak. This is precisely the kind of situation that, even according to the opinion that this should only be relied upon in a situation of dahak, of need, this is precisely such a situation. There are also, I could mention in conclusion, many other situations where this is a very practical and very useful halakha. It could be, for example, that a person is going on a tiyul, on a hike, and they're able to carry with them some food in a backpack, shall we say, and some water for drinking, but they can't carry enough water to wash their hands as well, particularly if we're talking about, shall we say, a family with many children. You can't carry all that water perhaps on your back. So it's possible to wash your hands before you start hiking, and hike for, shall we say, an hour, and then stop and sit down and have breakfast or lunch based on that natilat you did earlier, as long as you kept your hands on your mind, so to speak, and you carry on. That's another situation where this halakha is of great practical use and benefit. And there are even more extreme situations where it's obviously a great help to know that this is the halakha. For example, normally a soldier in an army base will find plenty of water and taps and what have you. There's no issue at all. But if he's out in the open field somewhere, he's on active duty, and even more obviously in a true combat situation, water may be in very short supply. He may have enough to drink for the next few hours until the next time he can replenish his water bottle, but his canteen, but he certainly doesn't have enough water to wash his hands. So if he knows that he's going to be going out to an area where water may not be available, he should wash his hands before going out on that mission or on that particular activity. And he can, on the basis of that, he can eat bread, for example, even many hours later. That is the halachic solution, a very straightforward solution for this very common situation that many people find themselves in.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.